It's Talking Synth 47, coming to you from a new corner of our showroom. Woohoo!
Yeah.
And we're still on samplers, which is really cool. I thought what you and Lucas did last week while I was on vacation was really neat, and thought we'd follow up on some of that. But first, there are a couple other things to talk about. What's happening in Chicago coming up?
Ooh, KnobCon. KnobCon number 9, I believe. Yeah, really excited about that.
Yep. We'll be there with our showroom.
Not this corner, probably the corner that's over there.
But we'll be kind of emptying our showroom. Maybe not emptying it, but bringing a big load of really cool vintage synthesizers and stuff.
Maybe picking up some vintage synthesizers while we're on the road.
Could be.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll be setting them up at KnobCon in Schaumburg, Illinois, outskirts of Chicago, September 10, 11, 12.
So when this actually airs, it'll be the following?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it'll be 1 week from when you people out there in podcast land see or hear this.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a really cool event. I've never been. I don't think you've ever been, huh?
I've been outside of Texas like twice in my life. And one of them was when we went to LA.
Okay. So it should be pretty cool. Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And a lot of good people will be there. I've been talking to some friends that are going to be there, and looks like a good time will be had by all.
Yeah, I've been following the thread on Modwiggler, and I'm surprised to see how many people are saying it'll be their first year attending. So I'm excited. I'm excited to meet some of the makers. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been setting aside a little bit of my paycheck just because I already know there's going to be some good things to be had.
Yeah. Well, we'll have some good things to be had there. So anyway, if any of you watchers / listeners are in the area, come on by KnobCon. And if you're at KnobCon, be sure and stop by the Syntaur booth and say hello. We'll be in a corner. We got put in a corner.
Yeah.
No, it's actually a really nice booth, corner booth right by the entrance, I believe. So
we should be right next to Suit and Tie Guy, a personal hero of mine. So I'm really excited and looking forward to that.
And you'll be able to tell the difference between us and him because we won't have suits nor ties on. I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to bring up before we jump into samplers is shipping news. That was a movie with Robert Redford, wasn't it? I think so. The shipping news. But it's not about that. It's about, recently we posted and we talked on here about the huge mess that the world is in with shipping right now. Yeah. And I read an article recently that just sort of laid out some of the details, and it's just astounding.
I think it's interesting once you start putting numbers on it, because you told me some really interesting numbers that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
Like...
So what I read was mostly about container shipping, which is the basis of all shipping pretty much. And so 2 of the big ports in China, biggest ports in the world, have closed down or hugely diminished their capacity due to COVID stuff. The port of LA, which is the largest port in the country, it's where most of the stuff comes in and goes out of the U.S., and it's severely closed down. I mean, it's operating, but it's just such a restricted pace. Right now, well, when I read the article, there were, I think, 39 full container ships waiting off the coast of LA to dock and unload. 39 of those huge things. In a normal instance, non-COVID, whatever, there's between 0 and 1 ships waiting to dock. And so right now there are 39, and it's just unprecedented. And it's almost as bad as it's ever been through all of this. So we're still going through this mess. Oh, and the cost of shipping, that one really got me. The cost of shipping a container, most places in the world, has gone up at least 400% in the last year. Some places it's gone up 600 and something percent, and I think there was one place that was like 900%. So
yeah,
the cost of shipping has just gone through the roof. And the service of shipping with what we talked about before was all of our outgoing packages destined for overseas go through a distribution center in Chicago, which is 6 weeks backlogged before anything even gets past Chicago. So it goes down the road to Chicago, sits there for 6 weeks before it goes on to its destination. That's regular mail. And so what we had to do, because we were getting so many people saying, I didn't get my package is lost, I'm denying this charge because y'all haven't shipped me my stuff.
It's been 6 weeks and my package hasn't arrived.
Yeah.
That's the one that I see probably fairly the most common in our emails. And it's like, it's just so wild to think about, because then it's like, you're talking a 6 weeks minimum before it moves from Chicago.
Right.
And you know, and of course, whatever credit card payment processing we're using will more than likely rule in favor of the customer.
Yeah.
Especially if you haven't received your item. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of, you know, a no-brainer at
Yeah.
that point. But
So we're having to give people their money back. Meanwhile, their stuff is sitting in the middle of nowhere, and then it gets to
it
them,
will
and-
arrive.
Yeah.
It will arrive. You know.
Anyway, that's been a big mess. And because of all that, a few weeks ago, we had to say, all right, anything shipping overseas, we're just going to have to ship it express or UPS or something that's trackable. And the cost of that went up from, you know, what they paid before, maybe $15.
It was about a
And now they're-
400% increase. You know?
And now they're having to pay $60.
Yeah.
But what we can announce today, and I'm happy to say, is we've talked to UPS, we've worked out some arrangements with them, and we're able to ship most of our overseas stuff through UPS expedited service, and the cost is $39.95, which is horrible,
Yeah.
but it's not crazy horrible like it was. It's a lot better than $60-$70.
Yeah.
And the good part is it's going UPS. It gets there very quickly. There's tracking all the way to the destination. It's not going to sit in some facility and be lost. And UPS is real good at finding stuff if something does go
They're
awry.
all right at finding stuff.
Well, there's one in particular
Yeah,
that's stuck in our crawl, but it's
Yeah.
now resolved. Thank you to our UPS rep.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's good news for us. So we can at least bring that cost down for our customers, and you know, it's a good accomplishment. I'm happy to be able to say that.
You know, the past year has just been learning how to roll with the punches.
Whew.
And just being able to be malleable and shift and pivot when need be. And it's been a learning process. That's for sure.
It's built character, right?
If you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But enough of that.
Enough of that stuff. Let's talk about synths and samplers. And the cool thing about what we're talking about today, sampler-wise, and what y'all did last week, is that it's using a sampler, but you're synthesizing sounds, basically. You're making new sounds, and that's what really is cool to me about it. Oh, and we did have one question that I answered on the podcast of a guy that watched episode 2 of Samplers Part 2 or whatever, and he said, hey, where's Part 1? Well, this is a good time to interject that
Yeah.
every odd number episode of Talking Synths is on...
Patreon.
No.
No?
Every odd number is on, what's that video place? YouTube.
Blockbuster?
You
You have to rent it on VHS, but be sure to rewind it because they will hit you with fees.
Okay, so it's on YouTube, it's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, whatever. The favorite place you get your podcast, hopefully it's there. Every even-numbered episode, though, is only on our Patreon page. And to see those, just go to patreon.com/synthwizards. And if you sign up for as little as $3 a month, you'll have access to every weekly episode of Talking Synths, as well as some behind-the-scenes videos, some
I think they get my
special
personal
Synth
cell
Wizard
phone
stuff.
number as well. If you ever just need some, moral reinforcement, you can text me.
Or if your synthesizer breaks in the middle of the night. And,
Yeah.
no, there's some cool stuff there. There's a lot of wave samples you can download. There's some Ensoniq ESQ patches, for instance. There's some software
we
stuff.
are working at adding more content to that as well. It's an ongoing conversation. And the cool part of being in the Patreon is you get to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want every episode, that's where you go, and we'll be happy to see you there. Okay, so now let's get to making some sounds. What you and Lucas talked about was kind of taking a sample and then taking one very tiny snippet of it, right? And just kind of manipulating it, scooching it around.
Yeah.
And in Ensoniq speak, on the ASR 10 and ASR 88, that's called transwave, right? Sort of.
Yeah, and you know what? I had a quick question for you because I was looking at the 88 and I was noticing the key bit on it. Does the 88 have polyphonic aftertouch?
No, it does not. So the Ensoniq keyboards with the weighted piano style action have channel aftertouch.
Yeah.
So just monophonic aftertouch. But the 61 note versions of them have polyphonic aftertouch. And that applies at least to the ASR 10 versus ASR 88, TS10 versus TS12.
I didn't even think of that one, the TS10 and the TS12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the TS12, but that's the one thing I miss on it.
It would be the aftertouch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those extra notes are nice, and whatever. The more notes, the merrier is the way I figure. So yeah, the ASR 88 only has the monophonic aftertouch.
Channel aftertouch.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah. And so based on what you and Luke were talking about, it reminded me of a feature on the ASR 10 that I'm not sure the other samplers have this or not, but you can create a sample within the sampler without sampling anything. So on the ASR 88, there's a function called create wave sample. And when you do that, it makes a single cycle square wave, which when you think about it, what could be easier for a digital sampler to do? Because the sample, it's like, all right, let's take it up to the maximum, let's sit there for a while, and then let's stop. And then let's stop for that same while, and that makes a up and then a down, and then you loop that and you get a square wave. So that's, I guess when the ASR came out, that was something that people were like, "Oh, that's a cool feature."
Yeah.
But it's like, why doesn't every sampler have that? It's the easiest thing in the world.
I know
to
that there are some samplers that give you the ability to draw a waveform. So
Yeah.
like the Korg
True.
DSS one,
Yeah.
Casio FZ, and then in my Roland S50 sampler, you can draw a waveform. I have a digital tablet for it, but the only thing I'm missing is the pen.
So if any of you viewers have 6 or 7 pins and have a spare,
Yeah, it's like a stylus, but it has a cord.
Yeah.
And it plugs in.
Yeah.
It's some kind of inductive pen. I'll find one day.
all right. Anyway, that's a cool feature, and I've set that up, and you get a nice little square wave.
So this was it's a synthesize option you were saying? You basically, so when you're scrolling through the parameters, does it say like create waveform, square wave?
It says exactly that. Create waveform when you go to the right button. And right before we started, I had to jog the brain because I haven't done any of this stuff in 15 years. And it took me a while to find it. First, you have to create an instrument.
Yeah.
And then you have to create a layer within that instrument. You're just basically making placeholders. And then you create a wave sample. When you do that, it plays this square wave. No great shakes there. But there are several cool things you can do after that. One is, let's put some effects on it. Makes a nice sound.
Right up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a chorus reverb digital delay, and just a plain Jane square wave through it. And so with this sound, you could envelope it and make it a slow attack, put a fast decay, and
Kind
you
of
have
like
a
how
pad.
we talked about in the ESQ1
Exactly.
video.
and then I would take that same thing and I would copy the layer, which actually doesn't copy any data. It just tells the ASR, play a copy of the layer when you're playing it. I'd detune that slightly. We'd make a big, fat, nice detuned pad, and you could get a really beautiful sound for very cheap.
Yeah.
And by cheap, I mean memory-wise. When we look at this instrument and look at the size of it, Well, first of all, let me say that if you save something on a floppy disk, if memory recalls, you're saving, in Ensoniq speak, 3,000 something blocks of data. So that fills up a floppy disk. And if you have a pretty good sized multi-sample piano or something, it might span 2 floppy disks or something. And each floppy disk takes you, what, a minute and a half, something to load?
On a good day.
Yeah, maybe less than a minute, I'm not sure. So those are the sorts of 1990s parameters we're talking about. So 3,000 blocks to fit on a floppy disk. This sound right here, 7 blocks.
Wow.
And as I recall, most of that, like maybe 4 of those 7 blocks or something, are the parameters that tell the effects what to do. And even if they're turned off, it has to save that. So
hard set.
So this is a tiny, tiny, tiny sound. It's just one single
Well, it's on and
cycle.
off. It's a square.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just one cycle of a square wave. And so some years ago, we got into making, back when we were doing sound design, we got into making a product called the Megadisc, which sort of focused on that kind of stuff. Exactly what you and Lucas were doing. It's like, let's see what cool stuff we can make by taking the tiniest little snippet of a sound, programming that into some cool sounds, and then we'll save all those onto a floppy disk. So we had floppy disks that have 32 instruments on them each. And that 32 was not by any means filling up the floppy disk. It's just that Ensoniq only designates 32 instrument locations on a disk.
Yeah.
So we could have squeezed a lot more. So anyway, it's kind of cool playing with that type of parameters. You know, let's see if we can make the tiniest sound possible that still sounds good. And you can see with just 7 blocks, that's not a bad sound.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you play a little bit more. I like that sound.
there it is.
So now did you go over any of this in your book?
Oh, the book. We were going to talk about the book. We were going to have one to show.
Yeah. Luke, you want to grab one real quick off the shelf? Right over here next to the t-shirts? Because you wrote a book.
I wrote the book on Ensoniq synthesizers.
Yeah.
I actually, the book is called Sample Magic, and there's a subtitle which, well, I'll tell you as soon as I get the book in hand. Thank you. Here's one of the books. Sample Magic, Mastering the Ensoniq EPS/ASR Samplers. I did this back in 2009, and it wasn't intended to replace the owner's manual. It was more, what can we talk about that goes beyond the owner's manual?
Got a picture of the Ensoniq headquarters.
Yeah, there's a little history
in there.
History of Ensoniq and their sampler builds and all of that. And then you get into some cool stuff like we were just talking about, how to create this type of sounds, how to manipulate sounds.
I like this.
SCSI drives.
The ASRX was a departure from Ensoniq's intuitive keyboard samplers. That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, well. Yeah, but there's a lot about hardware because the ASR 10s are funny about what they like to talk to SCSI wise, about what floppy drives they use. Yeah.
And so we actually talked about this on the podcast once. Taking apart a floppy to try to get it to work, and there's actually a nice pictorial, little step by step.
Yeah, if you have all your great stuff on a floppy disk and the floppy, something craps out, your dog chews one corner of it up or something, how do you save it? Well, yeah. So anyway, there's all kind of cool hints and tips and tricks that are not in the manual. And my other goal in that was to explain some stuff that is in the manual, but it's real technical and doesn't really translate so much to a practical sense of how you use the ASR. So
see, I've always liked the stuff like this where it shows you kind of like on a time plot the envelopes and explaining, when you're pressing a key, what's happening. I always like having that visual representation.
All right. Anyway, so one other thing that I wanted to talk about with this, square wave. And back in the day when we were making these discs and really getting deep into the Ensoniq ASR 10, this is something we, may I use the word, discovered. I don't know that anyone else had done this or ever thought of this. So I'm going to take the effects off and I'll show what I'm talking about. So there's just the square wave. Okay, so this is a single cycle. It's up half the cycle, it's down half the cycle, and then you loop. Now, one of our fun topics to talk about on the Ensoniq stuff is transwaves. So now, what happens if you take the transwave function or algorithm or whatever and apply it to this single cycle square wave? Well, you just got one cycle, so there's not a whole bunch of stuff to sweep through. But as you start sweeping through that one cycle, what happens? You start losing more of the square wave and getting more of the just off portion. In other words, you're making more of a pulse wave. And so, of course, then it's like you can do pulse width modulation on this. And so I've set it up to do this using the mod wheel as a modulator. And so when I roll the mod wheel forward, it's just going to shift the loop point. And your square wave is going to turn into a pulse wave and then get thinner and thinner. So here we go. Pretty cool. And then you can set a LFO to sweep through that. You can use the envelope to do that.
Well, my mind automatically goes to polyphonic aftertouch on the ASR 10. Is that something where you could, you know, with pressure, modulate the pulse wave?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that's where my head's at.
Lots of cool stuff. And then you put the effects back on. That to me is just so cool. And especially because we haven't used any memory. We haven't even sampled a sound into this sampler. So we haven't used the input at all. We've just created this kind of cool sound there. And in fact, let's go ahead and make more of a pad out of it. Let's give it a little release time, if I can remember how. Give it a little attack time. Maybe I can't remember how. For nothing. You just pull it out of thin air. That's what's cool to me. And I know we're getting kind of short on time, but I thought I would just load a few sounds from the Megadisc just to show you kind of just the sorts of things we were doing with no memory. And so I'm about to load it, and I'm going to show you how long it takes. Go. It's loaded. So and then the patch select buttons, you can do all kind of modifications with those. It's kind of like the ESQ wave bell sound. In fact, we might have actually sampled the waveform of that and then recreated the programming. So that's how you save memory in doing these samples. I think when most people, if you said, okay, make me a sample of the ESQ wave bell, which is a really cool sound, they would sample the whole thing and get the enveloping and all that kind of stuff. But really, you don't need to do that. You're sampling a synthesizer, so you just undo all the programming in the ESQ that makes the little vibrato wiggle to it and adds the enveloping, and then you just sample the raw waveform and you smash it until it's one wave cycle, which is all the ESQ1 is based on anyway.
Yeah.
And then you just recreate the programming on the ASR10, and then you end up with, well, that sound is 82 blocks, so still a tiny sound. And I think we actually weren't too worried about getting sounds down like 7 block size because we had a 32 instrument limit anyway, so we had the room to play with. So it's kind of cool.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, fun times. This is another fun one that shows just some programming stuff. It's called Harp Gliss, and with the programming in the ASR10, you can make certain notes only play certain notes. Like I'll go up the scale here. And why do that? So that you can do this. Those are the notes that an open harp would play when you do the gliss on it. So, fun stuff like that. Maybe another one real quick. Dark Zen Pad. Like when I talked about taking the square wave and making it into a pad, this is the sort of thing you can end up with. And then patch selects, let's see what we did.
Yeah, like
did some weird enveloping, or weird pitch envelopes. That's another thing you can do on the ASR10 is program a release kind of sound. Yeah, you can have a whole layer that doesn't play until you release it.
Yeah.
So I remember a good illustration of this was when we talked about sampling all kind of weird stuff, and back in the day when I was doing it with Fishbone, when they were doing a record, one thing we sampled was the air ratchet at a mechanic's place, and so I made it to where you could loop that, but then when you let up, you don't want it to go. You don't want it to still be ratcheting or whatever. So when you let it up, you can get the sound of it when the guy lets the handle off, and it slows down automatically. So it's some cool stuff like that. Just lots of programming tricks that are that you can apply to the ASR10 as well as many other instruments.
That's awesome.
Anything else in the last seconds we have?
I mean,
as far as you talking, and now I'm interrupting.
As far as synth news, I mean, we got the Take 5, the sequential circuits, Take 5, analog polysynth. Looks really interesting. And then, of course, Rhodes has been teasing a new EP. So I think that those have been the hot button topics.
Yeah. We'll keep our ears open for news on those.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see what happens.
All righty.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I'll say we hope we see you at KnobCon. And until then, we'll just modulate.